This has got to be the most conflicted I've ever been about a show. After almost 10 years, Stranger Things is finally over. Regardless of whether you love or hate this show, you can't deny that it was one of the biggest phenomena in recent years, and it's pretty crazy to see it conclude. I'd kept up with this show for so long, and I still remember watching that first season back in 2016 and totally loving it. But this latest season really did show how far Stranger Things has fallen in terms of quality from the writing, and it's something that genuinely upsets me. With a season full of plot holes, inconsistent writing, and unresolved storylines, I was so ready to write off this final season and declare that Netflix had failed at properly ending Stranger Things. That it was just too messy for what is supposed to be a conclusion, and that at least it was finally done and I could try to move on, wishing it had been done better. But by some strange miracle, as I got into the closing moments of the final episode, I felt the same way I used to feel about this show. I started to feel sad that this show that I'd been following for half of my life was ending, and getting to see these characters wrap their stories up was very bittersweet. Without denying just how many glaring issues there were even in just this episode alone, as they're near impossible to ignore, it's still apparent that I and a lot of people got what I think was emotionally needed from this ending, and I think it wraps up each of these characters' stories effectively, even if a lot of the actual plot of the rest of the episode isn't written as well. Maybe it was being in a movie theater with other fans, maybe it was just bias or nostalgia, but something managed to hold my attention and get me to feel some sort of satisfaction from this ending. It's something that I know is arbitrary because seeing these issues, I should absolutely hate the way this show ended, and while it's true that I don't like the direction the story went in, that ending was still able to make me feel something. But what even led Stranger Things to become what it ended up being? Was the ending worth it after all of these years of investment and waiting? And does this last episode make up for all the plot holes in this season? Well, no. But there's undeniably something to say about the impact that this show has had on a whole generation of people and how it feels to know that we're finally done with Stranger Things. Okay, so despite what I've said, I can recognize that this show is not what it used to be when it first came out. Back when Season 1 came out in 2016, everyone was talking about the nostalgic, dramatic, but funny sci-fi thriller that was so well done. It was the new hot thing and everyone fell in love with it, myself included. It brought nostalgia for people who were actually kids in the 80s, and interest from those who weren't. But beyond the face-level nostalgia and intrigue, this show had top-notch writing that made you curious about what was going on in the small town of Hawkins, Indiana, and how it was affecting the Byers family, or the Wheelers, or the D&D group. Season 1 of Stranger Things is probably some of the best that Netflix has to offer, and it's the reason so many of us got hooked on the show. It was just so full of mystery and had a looming sense of danger about what might happen, and it perfectly captured that 80s horror aesthetic pretty much to a T. Since then, with popularity came new seasons, and with more seasons came adjustments and changes and additions, and with every new season, people have kept up with this gang of characters and their interpersonal relationships, wondering what's going to happen with them with each new season. But as focus on the characters and their journeys became a main priority, it shifted away from being a dark and mysterious show about a supernatural world into something else entirely. With every season, Stranger Things has gotten closer to being more of that 80s style action-packed adventure story than a thrilling mystery, which while still very entertaining and reflective of the time period, is completely different to what the show was initially. Now the show was about keeping up with beloved characters and seeing what came next in their lives, with the supernatural elements of the story being a backdrop for their character development. Now, whichever one you think is better is completely up to preference, but in terms of quality and overall consistency, the show's beginnings were something really special that I don't think has been recaptured by the other seasons, at least not fully. That being said, I can't pretend that I haven't been keeping up consistently with this show, as I've watched every new season, wondering what's going to happen next with my favorite characters. By the time Season 4 rolled out, my friends and I were ignoring our classwork in the middle of class in order to see what happened with Max, or Eddie, or Steve and Nancy. It was just a part of our lives that pretty much everyone shared, and it was fun to experience something like that. Stranger Things' impact is completely undeniable. It was such a popular and talked about show, with so many moments from throughout the show that became iconic. Eleven flipping the van in Season 1, Joy setting up the lights, the Starcourt Mall fight in Season 3, Max escaping the Upside Down to Kate Bush's running up that hill. Stranger Things never really lost its social impact, but the show drifted from that darker tone and into something more light-hearted and action-packed that practically everyone knew about. Eventually, the show just grew into something so big that it was just inevitable that there would be more inconsistencies in terms of quality. It was just too big for its own good, and I think it got to the showrunners' heads with bigger stories and more characters every season, and it just became too much. As much as I hate to say it, it seems like all that pressure and scale culminated into making Stranger Things Season 5 the messiest season of the show so far. This season was definitely a very mixed bag. There were moments I thought were good, there were moments where I got a bit annoyed with some of the choices made, and there were moments where I was really wondering what was happening in the writer's room. It started off pretty decently, with Volume 1 having the energy that I had been used to, and I was curious to see where it was going. Sure, I definitely would have preferred a bigger and more chaotic season to really feel like the nightmare in Hawkins was ending, but Volume 1 had a lot of the action and sci-fi elements that fans would expect from Stranger Things. Then Volume 2 came out and lost some of the steam that the first volume had, kind of slowing things down and having too many scenes to explain characters' plans or new bits of lore that were added for this season. But I was still pretty hopeful that maybe in the final episode we would get some crazy well done story that takes all the questions we had and wraps it all up in a happy little bow to end this 9-year long show, right? Not exactly. Despite my admitted entertainment during this season, everyone has quickly pointed out that there are more than a fair share of loose ends and writing flubs riddled throughout the season. I think it's a problem that most shows will get to eventually. There's a lot of things you know you want to be in the closing moments. There's new plot lines to introduce, smaller moments for the characters to have, but usually it's all figured out and carefully planned before it's released, especially when you have a show that's as big as Stranger Things. I don't know if it was Netflix's doing, or the Duffers were being careless, or just too many things were cut or not included in the final episode, but you can see that this is not a full final product. No one was demanding for the Duffers to stick to only 8 episodes. Netflix should recognize that people are fine watching even more content from a show that they've kept up with for years, especially if they're willing to go to the movies to watch the finale. But there are just too many things going on for any of them to have been wrapped up in a reasonable way, and we ended up with so many plot lines that were legitimately just forgotten or unexplained by the end of the season. By the way, everything from here on out will be a spoiler, so you've been warned. What's so irritating is that it's not only big plot threads that are left unanswered, but there are just so many smaller issues. Why did Vecna need 12 kids specifically? Is it just a reference to clocks? Or is it something specific to the ritual that didn't get explained at all? Do they just leave the Turnbow family tied up and drugged in their home? Erica would get arrested for sure without a supernatural explanation, no matter what Derek tells them. How did Hopper just come back and become a cop after being presumably taken out by an explosion? And why is Max not surprised about him not being gone? But the biggest of all these unanswered questions are in the final episode itself. You would think that maybe they had planned to save the answers for the final chapter, just so that suspense would be built and we'd get our answers, but no. By the time we've gotten to the conflict being resolved, we realize that half of the things that got set up didn't even get properly resolved. For starters, when the group gets to the Abyss, how come there's no Demogorgons, no Demobats, nothing but just Vecna and the Mind Flayer? Wouldn't their main minions for the entire season be there with them, especially in time for the final battle? And once the final battle does happen, it just happens way too quickly, with a group of teenagers defeating this thing with what to the Mind Flayer should be rocks and sticks. Even with Elle fighting Vecna inside, this should still be a huge battle that takes up a significant chunk of time. This has been 9 years of buildup at this point. And I guess with Will and Eleven and the gang fighting, it was a bit easier, but that doesn't make it more reasonable for them to do what the military couldn't even do with a couple of Demogorgons. But that still doesn't explain why Will isn't affected at all by Vecna and the Mind Flayer being defeated, when this whole season we've seen Will feel the pain of the Demogorgons, basically as much as they feel it themselves. But once the giant hive mind and the main antagonist are defeated, he doesn't feel anything? It would have been interesting to see him have to have his own battle with his body as the group defeats the Mind Flayer, or honestly with the lack of stakes this season, he could have been taken out along with Vecna in the finale. Now, don't torch me in the comments, it's just an idea, I'm not a writer. I'm just saying that it could have added to the impact and stakes for this season, emphasizing the connection between Will and the Mind Flayer, and even influenced Elle's decision in the Upside Down. Also, wouldn't the smoke coming out of the kids' mouths mean that the Mind Flayer is still alive somewhere? And how did the kids themselves survive just being left in Henry's mind as he was defeated? And we still have the question of what happens to the military. Dr. K and her men were fully set on capturing Elle to continue Brenner's program, so it makes sense that their mission would practically be over once Eleven was gone, but what happened after? Did they just give up and let everyone go? Were there no legal consequences to everything they had done the whole season? They're just never brought up or shown after the Upside Down gets closed, and it just seems lazy to not even show a single scene of them being exposed or locked up. They just go away to never be seen again without any kind of explanation. I think it's clear to see just how many things were left either unanswered or at least not very properly answered, and it is genuinely shocking that this is the final product. I'm really hoping that the quality this season wasn't just because of shameless laziness and that it had something to do with corporate oversight, because this is honestly bad. For this to be the actual final season of a show, it can't have this many things left behind because these are questions that the viewer shouldn't have to ask. With how much time they used on directly explaining these things to us, they could have actually just shown them and saved the explanation for these plot lines as resolutions. Or, they could have avoided having so many new story threads this season and just have gone with the apocalyptic final season that most of us thought we were going to get, because that could have been perfect. Can you imagine a whole season of the town basically being invaded by the Demogorgons, with our main cast having to fight through it and actually having to worry about people being picked off one by one, leading to an epic final battle? I don't even want to think about it, because it only makes me wish that that had been the reality of what we got. For the sake of my sanity, I'm just going to chalk it up to the studio interfering and making this last season a combination of unfinished thoughts, unnecessary scenes, and unanswered questions. So then, that's it. The final stamp on a beloved show that lasted for so long. It ended, it was pretty disappointing, and now we can just move on from it. But I can't. There's still something about that ending that was still able to reach into the part of me that loved watching this show throughout all these years, and it really made me feel something. So, what? Am I just gonna take everything that I said back? Am I just gonna pretend like this season was actually really good, despite all of the inconsistencies and wasted potential, just because I'm gonna miss this show? Of course not. I can at least not go back on what I just rambled on about. I really do wish that something had been different about this season, whether it had been giving the writers more time to fully flesh out their ideas, or adding more episodes, or maybe not trying to fit so much into an already big season. I wish that we had gotten a season that took elements from throughout the show's entire run, that had that dark, mysterious vibe, and had left us with something to look back on as a great final season. But after getting through all the unfinished plotlines and new information, I went into this finale with low expectations. And while I'm not saying that the conclusion magically fixes this season's problems, those last 40 minutes were exactly what I had wanted from a conclusion to this show's characters. Something about seeing the kids conclude their story hit me in a way that this show had done in the past. The reason that people have kept up with this show for all these years is because we care about the characters and their lives. We wanted to see them get past their problems, build stronger connections, and ultimately save the day. It became a truly iconic piece of media, one that grew and changed, for better or for worse, but these characters changed and grew right along with it, and so did the audience. It's just a part of life, and it's something that we all have to go through. But seeing this cast that had seemingly been immune to those changes, like most shows' characters, finally have to leave their childhoods behind, was hard to watch. Having them have to move on just made the shift into adulthood so much more real, and it made it impossible not to feel something from watching the finale as someone experiencing that same situation. Seeing our main cast live their lives was more emotional than I was expecting, and it is 100% because of the fact that this is reflective of us, the viewers, who grew up watching this show and have grown up, finished school, and left our childhoods behind. The fact is that as I got to the end of the episode, the final episode of this show that had been a big part of my life, seeing this be the character's final chapter before adulthood was absolutely going to hit close to home no matter what. And I know that I'm being completely biased about this show, and that I can't judge the quality of this finale based on my feelings for it, but I'm not trying to say my opinion is a fact. This season did not do what it should have, there's no question about that. But on a personal level, this finale was impactful to me, and I can't help but feel something for this show and characters that I've been following for half of my life. They did such a good job writing each character's conclusions, with everyone not only keeping the spirit of their characters, but also showing how they've grown and changed. They all find their happiness and acceptance and are able to live on, even if it means leaving some things behind. We know that the older teens might never actually get to hang out all together again, and that the gang will never get to play D&D as a party again, but that's part of growing up. You lose some of the people closest to you, you all go your separate ways, but you find yourself. It's the definition of a bittersweet ending, and ending it off the way that it began, with the game of Dungeons & Dragons, was just perfect. I want to remember Stranger Things for the parts of the series that this finale reminded us of. The friendships and connections, the hardships and the conquering of those hardships, and the fun that we had along the way. The things that brought us together that we'll still hold on to, even when we go our separate ways. And the hope that we'll be okay as we move on into a new chapter of our lives. So, do I think the final season was good? Not really. I don't think it was terrible, or that it wasn't worth watching, but it wasn't written the way that a proper ending should be. It needed so much more time to wrap up the things that it had set up, but it left so much unresolved. It's really sad to see what happened with this final season, and I really do wish that this show that was a part of my life got a more proper final season that both celebrated the seasons before it and kept what made the show worth watching in the first place. Seeing that this show can still recognize what made it iconic and special, but chooses to waste time instead of taking advantage of it, just makes me wish that it had been done differently. But for the characters, this was a perfect conclusion, and I can at least be happy with seeing these characters go on and live their lives, and know I'm right there with them. I don't know that I would have changed anything about these character conclusions, and it left me with the feeling I was expecting from a finale. This show is always going to have a special place in my heart, and though I could say many more things about this final season, I just want to remember the best parts of Stranger Things. I give Stranger Things 5 a 6.3 out of 10. It was a disappointing season, but the finale was able to at the very least bring me back to what I loved about this show, and that's at the very least worth something. Thank you guys for watching to the end of this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and tell me what you thought of this finale in the comments down below. Maybe you hated it regardless of those last 40 minutes, or you thought the whole season was good. Just let me know your thoughts down below. Also be sure to let me know if you have any movies or shows you'd like to hear me discuss in the near future, or what you think I should do differently. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more videos like it, as I appreciate any and all support from you guys. It means the world to me. But with that out of the way, I'll catch you next time.